and welcome back to another episode of Reading Rural, y'all. I am Dr. Shay Parton, and I'm excited to talk more about Peter Brown Hoffmeister's Too Shattered for Mending and to tell you about my reactions as a rural reader. So let's get to it. I've talked before on this show about how much I love sad stories and sad songs because of the way that they illustrate the resilience of the human spirit, and I'm not sure that there has been a time in history when we didn't need that, especially right now. It feels like still in the middle of a pandemic and there's a war going on. There are just a lot of things that seem bad and scary and sad in the world, and so having reminders that we continue on, and when we think we can't bear even one more thing, somehow we do. That's really helpful to me. And so Little McCardle's story for me is definitely one of those. When recommending it to a friend recently, I described it as a book-length Townes Van Zandt song. Now, if you don't know Townes, you should really look him up, and I'll put some links in the description below to illustrate what I mean by that. He was once interviewed by a reporter who asked him why all his songs were so sad, to which he replied, well, not all of them are sad. Some of them are downright hopeless. So, unlike the hopeless songs, Too Shattered for Mending isn't completely hopeless, but it's not exactly what I'd call a happy story either, and so I really loved it for that. In his review and sort of blurb for the book, Jeff Zentner called it beautiful and brutal as a snowstorm. And I think that's a really perfect description, actually. And also, if Jeff Zentner is recommending a book, you probably should read it. But there's a quiet to this story. There's a tenderness and vulnerability and strength all mixed in together with some really just gut-wrenching sadness. I don't know if sadness is really the right word, I reckon, but there's just a grittiness and a darkness to it. But there's also these slivers of light that really shine through in Little's story, and I just really loved it, and I think you would too. There are so many things that I really appreciated about this book. Some of them I talked about in the last episode, my analysis of how place functions in the text, and some I'll highlight here. But I definitely don't have time to talk about them all. So I picked the top 3 things that I loved and that I thought were really important about this book. The first one is the way that time works and helps to structure the plot. So as I talked about in the first video of this series, the action of the book is laid out in a series of moments. Little's past and his present are all interwoven together in a way that feels more authentic to the way that people actually experience time in our lives. So our memories and what we experience in the present live together simultaneously, and Hoffmeister does a really brilliant job at capturing that here. Virginia Woolf once said that life is not a series of gig lamps, meaning that real life doesn't happen in a linear and ordered fashion. And Too Shattered for Mending does one of the best jobs I've seen recently at illustrating that. And so reading Little's story told this way was a really powerfully immersive experience. Number 2 is Hoffmeister's exploration of racism, especially against Latinx people. I've talked about on the show before how disappointing it is that the dominant narrative of the rural U.S. is that it's a white monolith. Nothing could be further from the truth. In his author's note, Hoffmeister explains that Little's grappling with and searching for his Mexican father and heritage are similar to his own journey to learn more about his own multiracial identity. Talking about the racism that exists in rural towns is a difficult line to walk because you don't want to overemphasize a rural stereotype, but you also don't want to hide the truth. Because racism is embedded in the policies and fabric of our society, it's everywhere, including rural places. There are also plenty of rural folks who are actively working to develop critical consciousnesses and anti-racist policies that would make their communities more welcoming and supportive of historically excluded populations and people that belong to the global majority, namely people of color. I often think about the students of color I had as a rural teacher and wish I would have included more pieces like Too Shattered so we could have had these important conversations. Number 3 is the complex representation of humanity in each of the characters. Ash Beckham has a really, really great TED Talk on owning your duality, where she describes the complexity of people as the capability to hold more than one thing. And I'll drop a link to that TED Talk in the description below. It's really, really great. This is very similar to Whitman's discussion in Song of Myself, where he says, do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. There are characters, including Little, in this book that make some really horrendous decisions. And even so, there are moments where they show kindness and compassion to others. There are characters that I just really, really wanted to hate, but I couldn't because of those moments where they could have continued to be mean or make bad decisions or do things to hurt some of the other characters, but they choose not to, and instead they are compassionate and they are kind in a time where the character really needs them to be kind. And I think that's really how people work too. We're not all good. We're not all bad. Sometimes we do bad things. Sometimes we do good things. And we just hope we do the good things when it counts. And so these characters are complex and nuanced in that way that I think is really important. Hoffmeister's characterization highlights the complexity of humanity in ways that help us remember that no one is all good or all bad. He forces us to reckon with that false binary, to see a more nuanced understanding of both people and morality in really important ways. Honestly, I can't say enough good things about this book. For all its grit, there's still beauty. For all its darkness, there's still light. For all the hurt, there's still hope. And that twist at the end of the story, oh boy, you want to read it to find out. I hope you'll get yourself a copy and recommend it to a reader you think would love it. That's it for this episode. But stay tuned for next week, because there's going to be a video outlining some teaching possibilities, as well as Hoffmeister's author talk. It was so fun. I just felt like we were old friends, and so you don't want to miss that. Until then, y'all come back now, would ya?